I've always been drawn to stories where a family looks perfect on the outside, but behind closed doors, there's a secret so heavy it changes everything. I started looking for literary fiction books like this because I wanted to understand how one hidden truth can ruin relationships, break bloodlines, and destroy generations without anyone seeing it coming. And trust me, these novels don't hold back. Welcome to Simplified Reads. Let's get into 10 literary fiction books about family secrets that destroy generations. When I picked up Everything I Never Told You, I honestly thought I was stepping into a simple mystery about a girl who dies too young. But the deeper I went, the more I realized this book isn't really about the death. It's about everything that happened long before it. Celeste Ng's 2014 novel, Everything I Never Told You, is a quiet but devastating story about the kind of family secrets that don't just stay hidden. They slowly destroy people from the inside out. What hit me hardest was how Ng shows that family secrets don't always look like dramatic scandals at first. Sometimes they're buried expectations. Sometimes they're unspoken disappointments. Sometimes they're dreams parents push onto their children without realizing how heavy they are. The story follows the Lee family after the shocking death of Lydia, the daughter everyone revolved around. And I could immediately feel the weight of grief mixed with guilt hanging over every page. Lydia wasn't just a child in that household. She was the center of her parents' hopes, regrets, and emotional survival. As I kept reading, I started to see how suffocating that kind of love can become. Everyone in the family believes they're doing what's best, but nobody is truly honest about what they want or what they fear. And that silence becomes its own kind of poison. The tragedy is that the family isn't broken by one event. They're broken by years of emotional distance, misunderstandings, and things left unsaid until it's too late. What made the novel even more powerful for me was the way it slowly peels back the past. The deeper the story goes, the more it reveals old wounds, buried resentment, and the loneliness each character has been carrying for years. It made me reflect on how easily a family can live together and still not truly know each other. And it also showed me how secrets don't just affect one person. They ripple outward, shaping everyone around them, and even passing down like an inheritance. By the time I finished Everything I Never Told You by Celeste Ng _, I didn't feel like I had just read a story. I felt like I had watched a family unravel in slow motion. It's heartbreaking because it's so realistic. It proves that the most destructive family secrets aren't always hidden in locked drawers or whispered behind doors. Sometimes they're hidden in expectations, pressure, and the things people never say out loud. When I started reading Homegoing by Jayasai, I immediately felt like I wasn't just opening a novel. I was opening a doorway into generations of pain, survival, and buried history. First published in 2016, this book hit me hard because it doesn't focus on just one character's struggle. Instead, it follows an entire bloodline, showing how the past doesn't stay in the past. It follows families like a shadow, shaping lives long after the original tragedy is gone. The story begins with two half-sisters in 18th century Ghana, Efia and Esi, whose lives take completely different paths. One is married off into comfort, while the other is sold into slavery. And from that moment, I could already feel the weight of what Jayasai was building, because I knew the consequences of that separation wouldn't just affect them. It would ripple outward into their descendants for centuries. What makes the novel so powerful is how it shows history not as a distant event, but as something personal, something carried in blood, memory, and silence. As I moved through the chapters, each one focusing on a different descendant, I started to see how trauma becomes inheritance. Some characters carry shame they don't understand. Others grow up with anger they can't explain. And many are trapped in systems that were built long before they were even born. What struck me most was how the book highlights that some of the deepest family secrets aren't hidden letters or scandals. They're untold stories, erased identities, and stolen histories that entire generations never get the chance to know. By the time I finished Homegoing, I felt emotionally exhausted, but also grateful, because the book forces you to look at how families can be destroyed not only by what happens inside the home, but by what the world does to them. Jayasai writes with so much clarity and power that every chapter feels like a reminder. The scars of slavery, colonialism, and racism don't disappear. They evolve, they travel, and they leave marks on children who never even witnessed the original wounds. To me, Homegoing 2016 is one of the strongest examples of a literary fiction novel that truly shows generations being broken, shaped, and sometimes even rebuilt. It's heartbreaking, but it's also deeply human. And when I think about stories where the past destroys the future, this book is one of the first that comes to mind, because it proves that some family secrets aren't chosen. They're forced into silence by history itself. When I moved on to Flowers in the Attic by V.C. Andrews, I quickly realized this wasn't going to be a normal family drama. It was going to be something far darker. First published in 1979, this novel feels like a nightmare disguised as a family story. And what makes it so disturbing is how believable the cruelty becomes once secrets and greed take over. From the beginning, I felt this constant sense of dread, like I was watching innocence get slowly crushed under the weight of adult lies. The story follows the Dollenganger children, who are taken to their grandparents' mansion after a sudden family tragedy. At first, it seems like a temporary situation, like something they'll survive and move past. But the longer they're forced to stay hidden away, the more the truth begins to reveal itself. What hit me hardest was how the book shows betrayal not from strangers, but from the very people who are supposed to protect you. The family secret at the center of this story isn't just shocking. It's the kind of secret that poisons everyone it touches. As I read, I couldn't stop thinking about how this book explores the ugliest side of inheritance: money, status, and power. The adults in the story make choices that are unforgivable, and the children are left paying the price for decisions they never made. And that's where the generational destruction really comes in, because the damage isn't only physical, it's emotional. It reshapes the children's sense of love, trust, and identity, and you can feel how the trauma will follow them long after the attic is gone. By the time I finished Flowers in the Attic, I felt unsettled, because it's the kind of book that stays in your mind. V.C. Andrews doesn't just write about a secret. She writes about what happens when a family chooses silence over humanity. And in a story like this, the secret doesn't just ruin one household, it creates a legacy of pain that feels like it could stretch for generations. When I picked up Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson, I honestly didn't expect it to hit me as emotionally as it did. Published in 2022, this novel feels like one of those stories that starts quietly, almost like a normal family drama, but then keeps peeling back layers until you realize you've been reading about a lifetime of buried truth. It's a kind of book that reminds me how families can live under the same roof, share the same blood, and still be strangers because of the things left unsaid. The story begins after the death of Eleanor Bennett, when her two children, Byron and Benny, receive an unexpected inheritance, a voice recording. And as I followed them listening to their mother's message, I felt like I was right there with them, holding my breath, waiting for each confession. What makes the book so powerful is how that recording doesn't just reveal secrets, it completely reshapes their understanding of who their mother was and who they are. As the story moves between timelines and locations, I found myself deeply drawn into the idea of identity, how it can be stolen, hidden, rewritten, and protected. The secrets in Black Cake aren't small. They're the kind of secrets that change names, change lives, and leave scars that children inherit without even realizing it. And what hit me hardest was seeing how Eleanor's silence wasn't just about deception. It was about survival, fear, and the cost of carrying a past that could destroy everything she built. By the time I finished the book, I couldn't stop thinking about how grief and truth collide. Because in this story, the family doesn't just mourn their mother. They mourn the version of her they thought they knew. And that's what makes Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson, 2022, such a strong generational novel. It shows how secrets don't die with the person who holds them. They wait. And when they finally come out, they don't just reveal the past, they shake the future. When I started Unburied, by Jesmyn Ward, I could immediately tell this wasn't going to be a light read. First published in 2017, this novel feels heavy in the best way, like every page is carrying grief, history, and something unspoken that's been sitting inside the family for generations. It's the kind of story that doesn't just entertain me, it confronts me. The book follows a Mississippi family, mainly through the eyes of Jojo, a young boy who's forced to grow up too fast. As I read, I felt how much responsibility he carries, not just for himself, but for his little sister, Kayla. Their home life is already filled with tension, addiction, and struggle, but what makes it even more powerful is the way Ward shows that the pain isn't new, it's inherited. It's been passed down through blood, through silence, and through trauma that no one has fully healed from. What really stayed with me is how the novel blends harsh reality with a haunting spiritual presence. There are ghosts in this story, but to me, they represent more than the supernatural. They represent the past, refusing to be buried. The family's history is full of loss, racism, imprisonment, and broken love. And as I kept reading, it felt like every character was trapped between what they want to be and what history has already decided for them. By the time I finished Sing Unburied, Sing 2017, I felt emotionally drained, but also deeply moved. Jesmyn Ward writes with such raw beauty that even the ugliest truths feel poetic. And what makes this novel fit perfectly into the theme of family secrets destroying generations is that it shows how some families don't just inherit land or names, they inherit pain. And if that pain is never faced, it keeps growing, shaping children into survivors before they ever get the chance to just be children. When I picked up The Promise by Damon Galgut, I wasn't prepared for how quietly brutal it would feel. First published in 2021, this novel doesn't rely on dramatic twists or loud moments to make its point. Instead, it slowly shows how a single broken promise can rot a family from the inside for decades. And the scariest part is how realistic it feels, because it reminds me that sometimes families don't fall apart all at once, they decay little by little. The story follows the Swart family in South Africa across multiple years. And what holds everything together is one simple promise made long ago. A vow that the family will give their black domestic worker, Salome, the house she has lived in and served in for years. But as time passes, that promise becomes less like an act of kindness and more like a haunting debt nobody wants to pay. While reading, I could feel how the family's refusal to do the right thing wasn't just selfishness. It was entitlement passed down like inheritance. What hit me hardest is how Galgut shows that this isn't just about one promise. It's about the moral sickness of a family that keeps choosing comfort over justice. Every generation finds a new excuse, a new distraction, a new way to avoid responsibility. And the longer they avoid it, the more their lives unravel. Their relationships break down, their faith collapses, their identities become unstable, and the family starts to feel cursed, not by magic, but by guilt. By the time I finished The Promise, 2021, I felt like I had watched an entire bloodline slowly expose itself. Damon Galgut doesn't just show secrets being hidden. He shows truth being deliberately ignored. And to me, that's what makes this book so powerful under the theme of family secrets destroying generations. Because the secret isn't buried in the past, it's sitting in plain sight, and the destruction comes from everyone pretending it doesn't matter. When I started reading The House at Riverton by Kate Morton, I instantly felt like I was stepping into a beautiful old mansion with a dark soul. First published in 2006, this novel pulled me in with its quiet elegance. But underneath that polished surface was something tragic waiting to be uncovered. It's a kind of story that made me feel like the past was alive, breathing through the walls, hiding in the gardens, and whispering through every memory. The story is told through Grace Bradley, an elderly former servant who once worked at Riverton Manor. As she reflects on her time there, I found myself completely absorbed, because her memories don't just reveal what happened, they reveal what was never allowed to be spoken about. The deeper Grace goes into the past, the more I could feel how secrets were built into the foundation of the house itself. Riverton isn't just a setting in this book, it feels like a character, holding decades of silence. What really struck me is how Kate Morton captures the divide between the wealthy family living in comfort and the servants who see everything but are expected to say nothing. And that silence becomes dangerous. The family's public image is everything, and the truth is treated like a threat. As the novel moves toward the tragic event at the center of the story, I could feel the tension rising, not in a loud way, but in a slow, haunting way that made the secret feel inevitable. By the time the full truth begins to unfold, I realize this book is less about one shocking moment and more about how a single hidden tragedy can echo across generations. The House at Riverton 2006 shows how the choices made in youth out of love, fear, jealousy, or desperation can leave scars that don't fade, even decades later. And what makes it so powerful is that the destruction isn't always obvious. It's hidden in memory, buried in shame, and preserved in the silence of a family that never truly healed. When I started reading Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng, I thought I was getting a sharp suburban drama, but I quickly realized it was much deeper than that. First published in 2017, this novel feels like a slow-burning explosion, where every character is hiding something and every perfect family moment is built on silence. The more I read, the more I felt like the story was warning me that secrets don't stay quiet forever. They eventually ignite. The book is set in Shaker Heights, a town obsessed with rules, reputation, and doing everything the right way. And that setting matters because it creates the perfect pressure cooker for destruction. As I followed the Richardson family, especially Elena, the mother who believes she has life completely under control, I could feel the tension rising. Everything looks organized and beautiful on the outside, but inside that household, emotions are being ignored, resentments are building, and the children are quietly cracking under expectations. Then Mia Warren and her daughter Pearl arrive, and the entire balance shifts. What struck me is how Mia represents freedom and secrecy at the same time. She's mysterious, unpredictable, and impossible to fit into the town's neat little boxes. And as the two families collide, I started to see that this isn't just a story about neighbors fighting or clashing lifestyles. It's a story about identity, motherhood, and what people are willing to sacrifice to protect the version of themselves they want the world to see. What really stayed with me is how Celeste Ng exposes the damage caused by good intentions. Parents think they're protecting their kids, but sometimes they're really protecting their own pride. People think they're doing what's right, but they're actually destroying someone else's life in the process. And the secrets in this book aren't just hidden scandals. They're buried truths about who people really are, what they regret, and what they fear losing. By the time I finished Little Fires Everywhere 2017, I felt like I had watched an entire community unravel. Celeste Ng shows that generational destruction doesn't always come from one huge tragedy. It can come from small acts of control, judgment, and silence that build over time. And when those secrets finally surface, they don't just burn one person, they burn everything around them. When I finally picked up We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson, I knew I was stepping into something dark, but I wasn't prepared for how unsettling it would feel. First published in 1962, this novel immediately drew me into the lives of the Blackwood sisters, Mary Catherine, Maricat, and Constance and their uncle Julian, who live reclusively in their family estate after a mysterious tragedy. From the first page, I could sense that the secrets buried in this house weren't just rumors. They were the core of the family's identity, shaping every thought, every action, and every fear. What gripped me the most was Maricat's perspective. Her world is contained, ritualized, and fiercely controlled. But as I read, I realized that her obsessive routines are a response to trauma, an attempt to protect the family from a past they cannot escape. The novel slowly reveals what happened to the rest of the Blackwood family. And as I pieced together the truth, I could feel how one dark secret had warped the family for generations. Every character is trapped by history, superstition, and guilt, and Jackson makes it impossible to separate the present from the past. I also loved how the novel blends gothic horror with psychological insight. It isn't just about what happened. It's about how the weight of family secrets can isolate people, distort reality, and even make them complicit in their own destruction. The village outside their estate represents judgment and intrusion, but inside, the real danger is the hidden history the Blackwoods carry with them, silently poisoning their lives. By the time I finished We Have Always Lived in the Castle, 1962, I felt like I had been inside a living nightmare. Shirley Jackson doesn't just tell a story of secrets. She shows how those secrets can dictate the entire trajectory of a family. It's haunting, claustrophobic, and brilliant. And it perfectly illustrates how a single dark truth can echo across generations, shaping lives long after the original events have passed. And that wraps up our dive into these haunting and unforgettable literary fiction novels. Each book I shared shows, in its own way, how family secrets can fester, shape lives, and sometimes destroy generations. From the quiet betrayals in Everything I Never Told You to the gothic darkness of We Have Always Lived in the Castle, these stories remind us that what's left unsaid can be just as powerful and just as dangerous as what's spoken. If you enjoyed this journey through hidden truths and generational legacies, make sure to subscribe to Simplified Reads, because there's a whole world of stories waiting to be explored, and every secret has a story.